As we spoke before the break, a lot of people are calling this a real watershed moment for the United States, and our own Governor Cox pointed out that in comments that he made about American history.
I believe that this is a watershed in American history, yes. The question is what kind of watershed? And that chapter remains to be written. Is this the end of a dark chapter in our history or the beginning of a darker chapter in our history?
So we have with us Jay Evensen, opinion editor of the Deseret News. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to have you join us. Look, you, the editorial board for the Deseret News penned an op-ed that started just with that, with the governor's quote that this is a watershed moment. So what do you think?
Well, it's kind of hard to say that this is a watershed moment when it's just another in a series of violent attacks, including a state lawmaker in Minnesota, and 2 attempts on our current president's life when he was a candidate. But I think every one of these acts, you could say, is a watershed in terms of how are we going to respond to it, and how are we? Is this going to foment more violence, or are we finally going to come to our senses? Ultimately, the question of whether it's a watershed depends on each one of us, because the future is made up of millions or billions of decisions by individuals all over the world. We decide what the future is going to be. And the governor talks about, hugging the grass and enjoying life. And I think those things are important. But I go back to Nelson Mandela, who was just a fantastic leader. And you think about taking over a country that had just been riven by racial violence for decades. And what he did was set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And one of his first acts was to hold a lunch where he invited the widows of both sides, the pro-apartheid and the anti-apartheid groups, to signal that we're going to sit down with our enemies and we're going to talk this out. I think that's what really needs to happen. There have been polls recently that have shown that we don't do that. Most ardent Republicans don't have any friends who are Democrats, and most ardent Democrats don't have any friends that are Republicans. We really need to sit down with people of opposite political views and listen and see why they feel the way they do, and then talk it out, make friends. I think that's how we're going to solve this, and that determines whether this is a watershed for good or bad.
So far, Jay, what we're seeing is not that necessarily, and it seems that there has been a good deal of blame going back and forth. And you talk about other shootings that have happened, even things that you might call assassinations over the last several years. Nothing seems to have gained the public attention that this one has for whatever reason. And I'll be honest, I wasn't familiar with Charlie Kirk a week ago. I really wasn't. I mean, I knew that he was out there, but I mean, this case, this situation for some reason has gathered our national attention in a way that I didn't expect. And I know you probably wonder what my question is here, but I mean, what do you think it is about this case? Because I appreciate what you're saying and I agree with everything you're saying. What is it about this case that's brought this to the fore so much?
Probably a couple of things. One is that he was so remarkably popular among young people. And they are the ones kind of fueling the discussion on the internet. And so that was one. The other thing is the videos that were taken of this. And I really liked a column in the Wall Street Journal by Matthew Hennessy, and he said, don't watch the video. Mm-hmm. And he says, a man, I can quote from him here, "A man was killed in the coldest blood. You know it. You don't need to see it. Mm-hmm. Our innocence about mankind's capacity for violence may be long since gone, but we still need to keep our little souls as clean as possible, unsullied by images of ugly and indelible things. Protect your central nervous system from exposure to toxic and corrosive elements." I really think that's true. For the people who were there and who saw it, I think a lot of them are going to need therapy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And why expose yourself to that type of violence? I think it makes an impact on your soul, as he says here in this column.
So I'm older. I have more life experience than the kids that were there that day. And I saw the video and it's still living in my head. Like it has shown up in my dreams over the weekend. And it's like, I should not have done that.
Right.
I should not have done that. And I did. But it's a generational thing, and not just generational, but like it's a worldwide movement that has impacted people, right? There's millions and millions of people who now have that image living in their head.
Now, I write about growing up in the 60s as I did, and all the assassinations that we saw them, but we didn't see a graphic image of them. The one exception being John F. Kennedy and the Zapruder film, but that was kept under wraps for many years. It wasn't until long after that that we see it. Now you can find it anywhere on the internet, but it's disturbing as well. And I would argue, don't look at it. But how do you tell an entire generation not to look at something when it's just ubiquitous? It's everywhere.
I'll admit I didn't watch the video, and I have no interest in watching the video. But I was a child of the '60s, and I remember being how it affected us. Not the video, but just the events when JFK, his brother, and Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, all assassinated within not necessarily a long period of time, and just feeling like we're falling down a rabbit hole. And of course, the country came through, and we did well. But it seems like we're getting the same level of response now, that especially with, like you say, Jay, you nailed it, with the young people who are probably wondering, where are we going? Where are we headed right now?
That's where I really have to give props to Governor Cox, because what we need are the grown-ups, the leaders, to calm everybody down and say it's going to be okay. We have this constitutional system of government, and it can handle these kinds of things. And we, the people, have the power and have the ability to work out our problems and to come together and forge a better future. Without that, I think, yes, young people would really be frightened and not certain what's going to happen in the future. So give props to the governor. I think he said it better than any other politician, I think, last week, and that was very important.
You know, one of the things that I wonder about, and I've been concerned as a mom for a long time, are first-person shooter games, right? Where those graphics have become more and more graphic. So when my kids were younger, I wouldn't let them play anything over like a 13 rating, a T13, right? Because of that, I don't want the desensitization to happen where it's like, well, I saw that on a game. But I think Governor Cox was right. We're not actually wired to watch a person die in front of us and not have it impact us in ways that can be ripple out for decades, maybe.
Right. And I think, and of course, I don't know the science behind this, but I think the more you watch those kinds of things, the less you feel the humanity and the less empathy that you have. And that's obviously a real problem.
So so how do we choose then to not let it, like, what do we do to not let it escalate? And we'll continue this conversation about the 60s, but that sounds fun. But how do we do that as an individual or in our own homes?
Well, a lot of the responsibility falls on parents, of course, for setting the tone. And how well you control internet consumption within your home. That's a very difficult thing, because not only are your kids watching things on their own devices, but they can go to other people's homes where maybe the rules aren't as strict as at your house. It's a dangerous thing, but I think parents need to instruct children. They need to have family meetings where they talk about this kind of thing. And then you hope for the best. As my wife and I have raised 5 kids. It's the most difficult thing I can think of.
Look, we're gonna talk more about how the U.S. moved past those political assassinations of the 60s with Jay when we come back. And remember, we're streaming live at KSLNewsRadio.com and on the app for KSL News Radio, sponsored by At Your Service Pros. We're continuing our discussion with Jay Evensen, opinion editor for the Deseret News, on moving past something like this world-shaking event. I mean, we've had, I think, assassinations before. This one has really gone around the world. And it's interesting to me also because there have been political assassinations in other countries that have not impacted the U.S. like this one is impacting other countries. Anyway, Jay, you shared in an article you wrote that one of your very first memories is President Kennedy's assassination. Would you share a little bit about that?
Right. And I've wondered about that. I was 4 years old at the time. Why did that stick in my mind so much? And I think it had to do with how the grown-ups around me reacted to it. My parents were strong Republicans. They were Goldwater supporters in '64, I remember, and Nixon supporters in 1960. But they were really shaken by what happened, and there was a lot of grief. I remember my mother took me somewhere with her right after the bulletin hit. It was a planned trip. And we came back, and my sister was there. My older sister had been let out of school early because of the tragedy. And she was sitting in tears in front of the TV watching what was happening. So I think it was that kind of universal grief that seared that into my memory. And I remember to this day bits and pieces of that, as quite vividly.
Yeah. How did the nation move past that? It was like about 4 years later that MLK and then RFK were both assassinated within 2 months of each other.
Yeah.
In '68, just 4 years after John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
You go back and look at the newspapers from that time, and you see a lot of consistent themes with today. There was a lot of talk about shouldn't we have gun control. That was a big topic in the 60s, and nothing really ever happened. I think we got some tougher laws, but nothing like what people were advocating or then or today. You could argue that we really never did move past it. I mean, there's a whole generation, myself included, that that's the seminal event. And people have always wondered what might have happened or not happened if Kennedy had been allowed to live. It was a big part of my life, the tragedies of the 60s. And I write in here about playing a game with a friend of mine where we would take turns pretending we were giving a speech and the other one shooting the speaker. And I think it's a sad and it's a disturbing thing, but we were just playing as kids do with the grown-up world as we saw it and understood it. There's a little girl next door who, she didn't live next door. Her grandparents did, and she would come visit occasionally. Her father went missing in Vietnam, and so Vietnam was a big part of my growing up. Assassinations were a big part of my growing up. I think what eventually happened was we solved a lot of the problems that were causing contention in the 60s. The Vietnam War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. But it seems like the violence, our violent tendencies were still just lurking underneath the surface, and they've come back again.
And that's interesting you mentioned gun control, because that was 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And we didn't do much, if anything, to regulate guns. I mean, we certainly had the Brady Bill after Reagan's shooting, but we're talking now about a different. I mean, a gun was used here. Make no mistake, but there was also this what we've been calling and describing this radicalization of young people, and the fact that these social media platforms are creating these algorithms. Do you think there's a time, Jay, to have a discussion about some regulation in that forum?
I do. You run smack into the First Amendment.
I know, right?
And so it becomes a very difficult thing. But Governor Cox called the internet a cancer, and I think he's right in these situations. I mean, we're seeing not only are we seeing passions being fomented on both sides, but now we have bots being placed there by foreign countries. We have no idea what's real and what isn't. I have relatives writing to me saying, I just saw this on Twitter. Isn't this disturbing? And I'm thinking, I don't think that's real. I think that's something from China or Russia or, somebody planning a bot. It's such a difficult issue, but we have freedom of speech in this country. And so I don't know how you put limits on that.
I think people might try, right? And that's part of the conversation is how far does the First Amendment go? We know that it's not carte blanche. We know that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
Right. But I think there'll be discussions in coming days for sure. Look, one of the things that stood out to me is when we talk about the 60s, I grew up then too, but I don't have early memories of these assassinations. I know, though, from later that when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, that it was RFK actually who went into Indianapolis and helped kind of tone it down, right? And he went in to express his sorrow.
That was an amazing act because a lot of cities in the nation were just coming apart. There were riots that night, and RFK went to Indianapolis and to the black parts of town, and gave a speech about how he had lost his brother to an assassin. And really calmed a lot of the feelings in Indianapolis. This is what I was trying to talk about in the last segment. We need our leaders to be a calming influence. We had the benefit in the 60s of our parents were from the World War II generation. They had a certain amount of wisdom that I think we lack today. We need that generation back, frankly. But we need our leaders to tell us it's going to be okay and here's why, and to remind us of the constitutional system of government that we have and how we've weathered these crises over and over again in our country, and try to just reassure the people. I wish we'd hear more of that.
We heard a little bit of that from Governor Cox,
Yes.
and I think that he tried to give that message. But and I thought, I guess I'm just naive, but I listened to that and I thought, okay, America, grab onto this. But here we are Monday morning, and I'm watching the screens behind you, and there's still this blame going on, and it's starting right at the top. And I don't blame the president more than anyone else, but we're not getting that message across. And this is a rhetorical question, Jay, and I'm sorry to even put you on the spot, but I don't know what's going on in this country that we're not getting that message.
It's very true, and it's a difficult thing. The governor, I think, realized that he was in a rare position where he had a national audience there at that press conference, and he took advantage of it. And kudos to him for doing that. But how do you penetrate the voices out there that want to just foment more discontent and cast blame? Like I said, it's millions of individual decisions in this country that are going to shape the future. We have to try to find our better angels, as the governor said.
You know, one of our texters reminded us that President Abraham Lincoln, he was asked once why he appointed some of his most vile enemies and protagonists to his cabinet after he became president. And he said, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to. And Greg, to your point, when you're talking about it hasn't happened yet, when President Kennedy was assassinated, it was 4 more years before we had Martin Luther King and then RFK also assassinated within 2 months of each other. So within 2 months of him giving that speech, he also had been shot and killed. It was not an overnight thing. It was not something that happened. But by golly gosh, it has to start at our family level, at our local level. And I hated your point that most Republicans don't have friends that are Democrats, and vice versa. Most Democrats don't have friends who are Republicans.
Well, and worse than that, you look at a demographic map of the United States, and we're choosing with our feet to move to areas of the country where people believe the same as we do. So we're becoming even more polarized geographically, and it's going to make it harder to listen to what other people think.
Thanks, Jay. It's nice to have you back in the studio. Jay Evensen, a Deseret News opinion editor, who's always kind to join us. And we missed you the last couple of weeks.
Oh, thank you. I missed you, both of you as well.
Coming up on Inside Sources, we're going to take an inside look at how members of Congress are responding to the killing of Charlie Kirk. Some lawmakers want to tone down the rhetoric, and others want to take more action. That's next.